thank you very much. Thank you to Advance for this event today and for including me, and to all the participants. Let's move to the first slide. Just to ground our conversation here today, I wanted to start with a fundamental question. And that is, we all hear about sustainability, we all hear about ESG, it's everywhere we look, it's everything we hear, but is it just hype and froth? So I thought, to earth the sort of my part of the conversation today, I'd present this graphic, which is from the US SIF Foundation, which is a non-profit that advocates for sustainable and responsible investment. They do a biennial trends report. And so the last report was issued in 2021. And what this graphic shows you, without even having to see the fine print, is obviously a massive increase in sustainable investing strategies since really 2012, and then since the last report, an increase of assets under management in sustainable investments up by 42%. So between 2018 and 2020, there's been a rising to over $17 trillion in sustainable investing in the US. So short answer, not just hype and froth. Next slide, please. What we're seeing is that this has been influencing significant investment decisions and activities, as seen on the previous slide. And what this is showing on the left-hand side is an excerpt from a letter by Larry Fink to CEOs. And he's the CEO himself of BlackRock, which is the largest investment fund in the United States. Larry Fink, for the last number of years, has written a letter to CEOs really in his fiduciary capacity as an investor in many, many companies. And for the last number of years, he has been saying that sustainability is creating a tectonic shift in investment. This year's letter, which is excerpted on the left-hand side of your screen, is no different. And you can see that his quote there is, "Every company and every industry will be transformed by the transition to a net zero world." On the right-hand side, a little clip from Institutional Investor, and basically saying that if we were frightened that something like COVID or other economic disturbances were going to make people think twice about sustainability investment and think of it more as a discretionary spend that was the first thing to go out the window when economic times got tough, think again. There's evidence that throughout the pandemic, for example, that sustainability investing and ESG funds have outperformed. Next slide, please. But what do we mean when we talk about sustainability and sustainable finance? And what I've tried to do on this slide, it's a little bit wordy, but I've tried to set out the what, why, and who. And think about it really that sustainable finance is allocating capital. So that means it's not just banks. It's not just businesses that are in the business of lending capital to other businesses or private equity investing capital in other businesses. It's every single entity that is making a decision about allocating capital. It's our governments, it's our non-profits, it's foundations, it's sovereign wealth funds, it's all the folks listed at the bottom of the slide. And what does this mean? We're allocating capital to essentially sustainable investments that are about decarbonizing and circular economy. And why are people doing this? They're doing this obviously because there's a growing recognition of the far-reaching and devastating effects of climate change. Many of them are doing this because there are, regulatory requirements on them to meet standards, but there are increasing numbers of very powerful companies, governments, and people who are doing this by making voluntary commitments in line with the Paris Accord and the IPCC reports and what have you. Next slide, please. So what are the key drivers here? Why is this happening? And what I try to identify on this slide is what I call the confluence of central factors. We've got this growing awareness and acceptance of the science and the reality, the enormity of the problem, and that is really now across the board. It's in politics, it's in corporates, and it's at the individual level. Companies are making these voluntary commitments that I mentioned earlier, and we see them very prominently. And it's folks like Google and HP and Nike and other names that you know very well. And what they're doing that's very important is not just putting their own organization on the line to make a commitment. They're basically saying, if you do business with me as part of my supply chain, you also have to make these commitments. We've got international accords, we've got government action, and importantly, and as Solid mentioned, this is a way that people can actually make returns. This isn't about charity. This is about good business. Next slide, please. We are, though, still, I think, near the beginning, and we need to stay committed and move faster. And to this end, what do I think the most critical success factors are? It's about consumer, shareholder, investor, broad stakeholder-led activity. Never underestimate the power that we have in voting our dollars and in activism. We really need government to play an important role here. The regulatory framework is critical. We need certainty, we need consistency, and sometimes this is going to involve market redesigns and changes in required laws. We need to stay focused and not be paralyzed by the size of the problem. We need to do something and just keep chipping away on it. And we need a price on carbon. Next slide, please. One quick example here, electricity is really my game, energy projects. This is showing how sustainability is transforming electricity markets from the previous centralized power, hub and spoke, to what clean local power is bi-directional distributed power generation. Next slide, please. New York State is, I think, one shining example in a country that I think has had a lack of federal leadership on sustainability, and I think we have seen a real surge of state activity, which has created momentum and a head of steam that has led the country. What I've listed on this slide, and you'll have access to these later, are some details of what New York State has done. Created a clean energy fund of $5.3 billion, which included New York Green Bank, which is $1 billion state-funded investment fund. And I was actually the founding COO and CFO of that fund. New York's created a clean energy standard where there's got to be 70% generation from renewable resources by 2030, 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. There are also a number of mandates, as you'll see on the right-hand side, about how much offshore wind by what date, how much distributed solar, how much energy storage, and the phasing out of internal combustion engines. Next slide, please. So New York Green Bank, of which I'm very proud, I was there for almost 6 years, as I said, as the founding COO, CFO. We took a concept from a blank sheet of paper to what is now a fully fledged, basically the analog of a private credit infra fund. And you'll see that over the period that New York Green Bank has been in existence, which is essentially since 2014, they've invested over $1.7 US. That leverages a total project value of up to $4.2 billion. It's over 100 transactions across 8 technology, clean, sustainable segments. And then on the bottom half of the slide, you see what the environmental benefit has been. Importantly, in terms of avoided CO2 and cars taken off the road, but also energy efficiency and reduction in gas usage. So I'll leave it there and look forward to come back and touching on some of these themes in the panel discussion.